Hi, I'm Dan Aubuchon, and welcome back to The Joy of Teaching. Today, we're going to be talking about standards and habits. Those of you who've known me for a long time know that one of my lifelong passions has been reading. And I've dragged a collection of books with me around the world. Probably the most difficult part of dealing with my health issues in the last years has been losing the ability to pick up a book and read it. But I'm dealing with that in different ways. So when we're talking about standards and habits, there's really 4 books that came to mind when I was working on this topic. One of them is this book here, Alistair McGraw's 7 Keys to Being a Great Coach. I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day, Renee Zondag, and we were talking about the elements of being a coach, not just for tennis, but the idea of being a coach and a teacher, which is the heart of why I'm doing these YouTube series. And we were talking about the most important thing is to address that being a coach is all about being a better human being yourself. That makes it a better example. I was introduced to Alistair McGraw's work by Paul Newman, who I know watches these YouTube videos. And Paul was sending me these quotes because I guess McGraw had been doing some coaching workshops in England. Alistair is a track athlete from South Africa who has moved into the performance coaching world. And he works with athletes in all different sports, and he's worked with a lot of tennis players, and he's been a speaker at numerous tennis coaching workshops around the world. So Paul had sent me a lot of these quotes, and I was very impressed with his work, so I picked up this book, 7 Keys to Being a Great Coach, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've referred back to it many times over the years. Alistair begins his book, chapter 1, his first of his 7 keys to being a great coach, with the idea of standards. That he believes that high standards are the difference between being a good or a great athlete or coach. That without high standards, you can't achieve high performance. And I found that to be very true as well, and he gives numerous illustrations in his book that back up his contention about the importance of high standards. Now, how does that connect with habits? Well, there are 3 great books that I've read over the years about habits. One from Charles Duhigg, I believe it was called Changing Habits or something like that. It was a very scientific book that explored a lot of the research on how habits are developed and what you can do to change them. That was followed up by a book by James Clear called Atomic Habits that was absolutely fantastic. It's probably the best book I've ever read about habits. I still get numerous emails. I'm on James Clear's mailing list. And the final one, the most recent one, was by Dr. B.J. Fogg from Stanford University called Tiny Habits. And he's developed a methodology for how to develop and change habits that's quite interesting. But so how do these 2 things intersect, standards and habits? Well, if you have high standards, you're going to develop habits that allow you to have the behavior that will lead to good performance. And that's how you'll achieve those high standards. And that sounds a little bit wordy, but let me give you some concrete examples. One of the policies that we had in PBI, one of the standards for dressing professionally on the tennis court was that we wanted our tennis coaches to always wear shirts with collars. So that was a policy, that was the standard. And as Alistair McGraw says, standards tell people the outside world as well as the company itself, how things are done around here. So PBI professionals always wore shirts with collars. We always looked professional out on the court. Even when the styles changed and professional players were looking good in shirts without collars, we maintained that standard. And to this day, even though I'm no longer able to teach professionally at a club or a resort, if I go out on the court with Scott or anybody else, I don't feel comfortable in a t-shirt. I have to wear a shirt with a collar. It just feels odd if I'm not on the court, not dressed professionally. So the standard was set. It was followed all the time, which developed the habit, and that led to the behavior, which equaled the performance. I'll give you two other examples. One was, again, a PBI policy of arriving early. It was a policy that you should arrive 15 minutes before your first lesson of the day. And if you were late for a lesson, you had to pay a fine and the student got the lesson free. That was the policy. Over the years, because I followed it so much, it became really automatic for me to show up early for things. I was in the habit of doing that, so I always met that standard. A personal standard of mine was teaching with good tennis balls. I hated it when balls went dead or if they were worn down too much. Those who've worked with me at multi-pro sites knew I was obsessive about sorting through the balls and getting rid of bad balls and adding new ones. In my early years in PBI, I spent some time as PBI's quality control director, and Peter sent me around the world visiting PBI sites, and I would arrive at a place, and I don't know how it happened, because this was before the internet and before email and communications of that type, but somehow word spread that one of Dan's pet peeves was tennis balls. And I can't tell you how many times I arrived at a site and I went to look at the pros teaching balls, and they were all brand new, shiny, slippery tennis balls that had just come out of the can the night before I arrived. And it always made me laugh. And I used to tell pros, geez, these are nice. Show me the balls you were teaching with yesterday. That's the thing that would determine what was good. We asked one of my students at Bighorn, a man named Jeff Artoon, to write something about his experience with PBI. And I really was impressed with what Jeff wrote, and it impressed upon me the importance of these high standards, because the things that Jeff wrote about weren't the wonderful teaching that I was doing or the innovative concepts that PBI promoted. The things that Jeff talked about were the fact that I was always there early, the fact that the tennis balls were always in good shape, the fact that I always looked professional. Jeff was noticing the standards that we had set in PBI. So that was a really great lesson for me, even though the habits were automatic and I was meeting the standards without thinking about it. Seeing how one of our customers noticed those things really made a huge impression on me. The last example I'll give you for standards has to do with that word itself, being an example. When I was teaching young professionals how to teach the PBI concepts, one of the important concepts, one of our fundamentals of the game, was the use of your left hand for a right-hand player. Holding the racket up on the throat, in the fingertips, feeling the strings with the index finger. Now, a lot of times, the young coaches or the new coaches that were coming into PBI had been players for a long time, and they were probably pretty decent players. And many of them, probably most of them, had not used this left hand to help control their racket. And it was not their habit. So when they were teaching, they would go back to their normal ready position and their normal use of the left hand. And I was really on them all the time to try to get them to get used to doing this. Some of the coaches would ask me, well, why do I have to do this? Because I'm already, done with my playing career and I'm just teaching, and the use of that opposite hand isn't going to make that much of a difference. And I had to explain to them that you have to be an example for your students. We don't know how the student learns. There are a lot of different ways of learning, and one of the ways of learning is visual learning. And for visual learners, they see what you're doing. If you're telling them to use their left hand, but your ready position is always down here, they're not going to learn it. You have to be an example. I think of that old saying is, I can't remember the saying exactly now, but it goes something like, I can't hear what you say because what you do is so loud. What you do has to be congruent, has to match what you say. You have to be an example. So I really would ask all of you to take a look at your standards. Where could you up your standards? Where are you already having very high standards? The idea of high standards is probably one of the things that you can do off of the court that will improve your teaching more than anything I can think of. Remember this formula: high standards equals habits equals behavior equals performance. So that's the topic for today. I hope all of you will remember to take a look at the hat. I have to mention that last week my Celtics hat, I won't wear it again on camera because the Celtics played their worst game and lost badly, but they did win the series and have now moved on to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I will wear the hat, but not on camera again. Please mention in your comments what hat I'm wearing today and why you think I'm wearing it. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I want to thank Jim Leupold, who was one of our new subscribers this week. Jim is one of my oldest and dearest friends, and I know he was too busy during the season to watch this, so I'm glad that he's now watching it and subscribing. And Steve Halverson, thanks for your great message. I wish I could mention everybody in all the comments, but I really, really appreciate your comments and your feedback. Please go out there and be joyful.